And a very warm welcome to the next of our Eco Church sessions. It's great to see you all again and to welcome a few new faces. So for those who haven't joined us before, we've been running these sessions over the past few months to provide each other with information and new ideas and encouragement as we all take part in environmental action within our churches. We hope also that these sessions provide us with a good opportunity to meet and discuss green issues and to share our experiences. So in each of our sessions, we've focused on one of the 5 Eco Church scheme areas, and we've invited along speakers with particular expertise in these fields. So this morning, as you know, we're focusing on buildings, how we use and heat and maintain our buildings obviously provides us with the greatest opportunity to reduce our carbon emissions. But at the same time, these areas present us with by far the biggest challenges. So we're eager to hear what our speakers have to say to us this morning and any advice that they can give us. So we're very grateful to Claire and Chris from the Synod office for sharing their expertise with us and for joining us. But we're particularly pleased to welcome Reverend Michael Hodgson, who's going to first talk about a project that he oversaw when he was the minister at Libanus Chapel in the Brecons. So welcome, Michael, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I'm not in Brecon now. Hopefully you can all see my screen now and are able to see the pictures I'm hoping to show you, so that some of what I've put together has had to be by memory, and I'm a little vague over some of the figures because I no longer have those figures. But yes, well, the village of Libanus lies in the heart of Brecon Beacons, about 4 miles south of Brecon. Over the years, the village lost all its shops, its petrol station and its post office. The community itself was very badly hit with the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001. In 2006, the village school closed, and with it went our village hall. And that was really the catalyst for us to have to start to think about our chapel and what we were doing there and how we were actually using it. The chapel was built in 1972 to replace an earlier building, and it was designed by the architect to be a flexible space. The church then went and shot that design in the foot by installing fixed pews, a solid pulpit, a narrow platform, and then screwed the heating pipes to each of the pews so that if you tried to move any pews, you also lost your heating system as well. So how to shoot a design in the foot before it ever even started. And just to complete that little bit, and I'll come to the green in half a second, just to complete that bit, the 1970s were not known for the quality of their building projects, and this chapel was no exception. There was no insulation in the building whatsoever. There wasn't even a loft. The rafters were covered in board to which the stakes were fixed, and the underside of the board was then painted black and the rafters white, and that was the chapel ceiling. So what you see in that picture, the black squares are just the board to which the roof tiles were nailed. The inadequate heating system never ever stood a chance, and in winter we would actually have been warmer if we'd worshipped in our fridges than in the chapel building. In the chapel's favour though, it did have water, toilets and drainage and a small kitchen, which in rural Mid Wales chapels is a very rare thing. The potential was obvious. Remove the pews, remove the pulpit and insulate the place. And we had the potential for a very good chapel come community centre with beautiful grounds and with ample on-site parking. Now, why did we go green, which I think is possibly the main part for your discussion this morning? Well, dare I say, we didn't actually set out to go green in our initial thoughts. We moved to that position because when we started to go into everything, it became very obvious that the green options actually suited us better. The building is now heated by an air source heat pump, which then feeds smart rads, which have blowers in them. And we did this for a number of reasons. You see, we don't have gas in the village. Oil is expensive, delivery can be hit and miss in bad weather, and there have also been a number of churches which had oil stolen for their heating system. We didn't want a complicated system for that was electrical, that relied on all sorts of gizmos, because we regularly get power cuts in the village, which plays havoc with any form of timer. We also wanted to be able to keep a background warmth in the building to stop the place freezing when not in use. For years, we'd had to replumb parts of the building each spring because we always lost parts of the plumbing in the winter when it froze. So we wondered about the green option and looked specifically at the air source or ground source heat pumps. The borehole option was quite beyond our budget. And yes, sadly, there is a limit to the number of times I'm prepared to sell my body in aid of church funds. So the borehole was out of the question. Ground source was an option. We had the land in the graveyard, that was really not a problem, but we were fearful that in the future, pipes could get damaged by grave diggers or create problems for where future graves could go. And so an air source heat pump seemed to be the solution. Now, having reached that conclusion, I then heard all sorts of horror stories about how it wouldn't produce enough heat. And I actually held on to some of the old heating pipes in case we needed to reinstall any to top things up. But our installer assured me that insulation was the key, and that may well be of great interest to some of you. Insulation was the key. If we got that wrong, then it wouldn't heat the building adequately. If we got the insulation right, that would be fine. So it was all really rather scary, but we went ahead and we did what was necessary. And the building is now beautifully warm. It can even sometimes get too hot in there. And we are using far less electricity than we were. And that's with the building being used an awful lot more, and with it having a background warmth going when it's not in use. The lowest we've ever put the thermostat on is 5 degrees, so that it never ever drops below 5 degrees there, thanks to the air source heat pump. The noise that the blowers make is minimal, and it really has been tremendously successful. The congregation are very happy with what they did and no regrets about it whatsoever. So what about that insulation? And you can see some of the insulation there being put on the ceiling. As I said before, there was none. Any insulation would have been an improvement. We knew, however, that the key to the heating system actually working was going to be the insulation, and so we did the floor, the ceiling, and the walls. We used green insulation material, but don't ask me what it was. Sorry, I haven't got that information in front of me anymore. It's working wonderfully well. By burying our old Marley floor tiles under the insulation and then under the chipboard panels and then putting on a new floor covering, we effectively managed or lost our asbestos problem at the same time. I thought it was pretty bendigedig. A new low energy heat light system was put in as well, which replaced the old wall hanging lights, which reached the end of their life and which also took new low energy bulbs very badly. We were now able to use the new ceiling to throw the light into the main area, and it all works superbly well. We then actually insulated the walls externally and then timber-clad them as well. And that was probably the most controversial part of the project. The building had been concrete rendered and it was painted white. So getting the external changes past the chapel members was Or should we just draw a discreet veil about how we managed to get that one through church meeting? Now, we went for external insulation because we had a problem with the old render. It was falling off and the bricks were of such poor quality that the render was pulling off a quarter to half the brick as well. To hack off and re-render the building was simply not an option. The bricks were of too poor a quality. So by insulating it on the outside, that then meant that the timber cladding didn't have to touch the old render. We could just drill through it, and the new insulation actually solved the problem that we had with the render falling off as well. The cladding came from sustainable forests, and the building now sits much more softly in the landscape. And the hope is that it will cope with the weather conditions rather better than concrete would. Building takes a fair old battering from the weather. Remember, we're only a mile from the Storey Arms, and so a natural material in which there's some give and take was much better. It was pressure treated, and we're assured that future maintenance isn't going to be an issue. Now, some of the windows are double glazed, some are still single glazed, or some were still single glazed. I don't know whether anything on that has changed. We'd like to replace the single glazed windows in due course, but at the time we simply didn't have the money and they weren't causing a major problem. We also, at the same time as getting the planning permission for all of this, got permission to install solar panels on the southern roof. So again, we wanted to have the opportunity to generate electricity in due course. And that, I think, is a part of the project which has not yet been completed, simply because the Almighty didn't put an extra hour in the day and an extra day in the week when we were trying to sort it all out. So in Libanus, we had a very ungreen building and we wanted to improve it. We wanted to look and see what we could do. And we found that the green route was much better for us, and it actually opened up more funding for us as well. And in every way, it has transformed the place. It also energized the congregation. We have a good building and a good state of repair. We are warm. We can welcome people to the church now without having to ask them to keep their coats and their scarves on. It doesn't cost a small fortune to try and do anything in the building. And those who had reservations about it are now sort of convinced that we did do the right thing. It's used by the community for all sorts of things. You can see here a village fair to celebrate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. The WI use it for some of their activities as well. And quite honestly, nobody would want to go back to the building as it was. So that's just a little brief overview of Libanus, what we did, why we went for the green option, and how important getting the insulation was, getting the insulation right was. If we got that wrong, the whole thing would have failed. But because we got the insulation right, everything else fell into place.
So yes, morning everybody. My name is Claire and I'm the property officer for the Synod in Wales. I've been in post since the beginning of the year, following on from Sue Cole, who retired. So some of you, I think, will know me. You've seen me in other Zoom meetings, but for those of you who don't know me, it's nice to meet you virtually this morning. I'm going to be talking about greening church buildings, and I have to say I'm a bit of an expert on this because I was featured on a BBC Radio Wales programme on Palm Sunday about Eco Church, but only for 3 minutes. So I am an expert, but only a little bit of an expert on this. Now, where I thought we'd start is just by having a bit of an overview of the buildings that we have in the Synod. There are 86 congregations in the URC in Wales. That relates to 69 church buildings that are on my list. The rest are local ecumenical partnerships or churches meeting in other venues, but 69 buildings that come under my responsibility. And of those, 25 of them are listed. which is quite a high proportion. We've got 1 grade 1 listed chapel, that's Mysoronnin. We've got 20 grade 2 star and 4 at grade 2. So that begins to give you an idea of the variety of buildings that we have. And where are they all? Well, in the north, we've got a congregation up in Rhyl. I have actually looked up the latitudes of this, and I know that Rhyl is slightly more northerly than Ross-on-Sea. Barry in the south, and that is just slightly more southerly than Bethesda Fro as well. Over in the west, we've got Knowlton Haven. In the east, we've got Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwr. Then our oldest building, this is Mysoronnin, I mentioned, it's our grade 1 listed building from 1696. The newest building that's coming up is in Barry again. So we had Rosie at one of the Eco Church webinars talking about that amazing project that they've got going on in Barry with a community garden, but also a new building, which I'm hoping is going to be opening quite soon this year. We've got churches in all communities of all sizes. So in Cardiff, we've got 7 churches serving the local population of 335,000 people. And then we've got churches like Bailey Hylog in Mid Wales, which is in the middle of fields. You can't even get a car to it. So much more remote and rural. We've got churches with their names ranging from A, Aberedu, to Z, Zion's Hill. We've got 6 tabernacles, which gets a little bit confusing at times when you're trying to check things out on the database. And we've got 7 St. Somethings. And just out of interest, St. John is the most popular saint for URC churches in Wales. So that's just a quick overview, really, of the age of buildings we have, where they are, and the size of the local populations that they might serve. They're also made of all sorts of materials. There'll be brick, there'll be stone, some will have slate roofs, which when you're talking about gridding your buildings, the variety makes a big difference to what you can do. Just a bit more on the age of the buildings there. You can see that most of the buildings that we have are well over 150 years old. So as Michael was just saying in his presentation then about when you have a new building and then what you can do with that if it's built in the 70s and how you can change it, that it's going to be different according to how old your building is, what it's made of, to what you can do. So taking all of that into consideration, I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to do a presentation which will tell everybody exactly what you can do with the building that you're responsible for, because there is such variety in the age of it, what it's made of, where it is, what your resources are, what the size of your congregation is. So what I've done instead is I have created the ultimate average URC Church of Wales, Llaneco URC. So Llaneco URC, I'm going to go through what they can do to green their building. And hopefully there'll be something of interest for everybody that will be relevant. It's very much, I've realised I'm inspired by St. David and do the little things. That's where I'm coming from with this, really. Let's go through what are the small things, the small steps that we can take to build up to bigger things. So to introduce Llaneco URC, it's in a community of an average size, not the biggest, not the smallest. It's got a congregation of an average sort of size as well. It has an average number of activities going on in its premises in non-COVID times, and it has a minister who is above average, because all ministers are above average. And what's Llaneco URC going to do to go green? Well, the first thing they're going to do is sign up for EcoChurch. I have to say that the links for all the different websites and organisations I meant in this presentation, I have sent them to Jason. So I think they're either going to end up in the chat or he's going to email them around. So don't worry about trying to write down all these different organisations, because we'll send you the links. But starting with the EcoChurch of Rocha project is the best thing to do. When you sign up, you'll get a long questionnaire, which is really helpful for working out where you are to start with and giving you tips on the things that you can start to do to go more green. And there's an award system as well, so that you can work through your bronze, silver and gold awards to make your building. And it's not just about your building with EcoChurch, it also covers worship and lifestyle and bigger projects as well. But specifically for buildings, it is a really good place to start. So that's where Llaneco go. They get themselves logged in and registered with EcoChurch. The next thing then is calculating your carbon footprint. This is something that when you sign up for EcoChurch, they'll encourage you to do. 360 Degree Carbon is a website that's been specifically developed for churches. So you can do lots of carbon calculating websites that are available online, but they might be more about for your own home or for a business, rather than really specifically looking at the way churches use their buildings. And again, it's a questionnaire. You go through, you can input all sorts of information about your energy usage, about the food and refreshments that you serve after services, about how many bin bags you put out each week, and it'll help you to calculate your carbon footprint, which is just one way of measuring your environmental impact. Now, of course, this year and last year have been very unusual for people with their carbon footprints. So you might want to, if you're going to do this, look back at 2019. Or perhaps you think, do you know what, we're going to start from later this year or even the beginning of 2022 and start tracking our carbon usage then to get a sense of what's more usual for your building and how you use it. Well, once you've got that figure for your carbon usage for an average year, then the challenge is to reduce it. And the suggestion is by 5% a year. So it depends on what you've got, where you look at your calculation, what are the areas that you begin to identify that you think, oh yeah, we can bring that down a little bit. And then once you've done that, you just need to do it again to make sure that you are coming down with your carbon emissions, just to keep track on it. And as I say, it is just one tool in being able to measure the impact that you're having as you try to go more green. Now, the next thing that Llaneco URC are going to look at is their energy supplies. They have gas and electricity in their premises, and they're going to have a look at going green. So here are a few green utility companies: Bulb, Ecotricity, Octopus Energy. Other companies are available. It might be that if you are sort of locked into a long-term contract with a provider, perhaps over 3 years, you might be able to contact them and look at going onto their green tariff, which you might be able to do in the terms of your contract, rather than swapping to a new supplier. So have a look in what's possible for you with that. Just to say, with Bulb, we do have an account with Bulb as a synod, which means that if we refer people, then there's a £50 thank you fee for us for referring people, but also for those who take up the account. So I'm not doing a big push for Bulb. If you decide that Bulb is the best for you, there is a link that you can use. It will be on the list, but you can also get in touch with me for that. But it's just about having a look at what's available and who's going to be the best supplier for you. So Llaneco URC, they decide to go green with their gas and their electricity. Oh, I don't know if you got that, but my remote desktop has just disappeared. There we go. And they decide to get a smart meter. And this again is something which will work for some people in some places and won't be so good for others. But Llaneco, they decide they're going to get a smart meter. It helps you to keep track of your usage in real time. You can actually see what appliances are using up electricity whilst you're in the building. It's quite useful, I think, for tracking down what's on standby and perhaps draining energy. But it does depend on somebody being willing to and being interested in keeping an eye on that. So a smart meter is an option which Llaneco decide to go for. The next thing they have a little think about is how they are losing heat through their building and how cold air is getting in. As Michael pointed out, insulation is a big thing, but even just in a small way, you can think about how you might just, if there is a drafty window that just really needs sorting out, if there's a door that tends to get left open all the time, can you get a closure for it or put a sign on it just to ask people to close the door? So even in small ways, having a think about where you might be losing heat, where the cold air is getting in, and see what small things you can do just to make those improvements will help to make your building just that little bit cozier and more energy efficient. Next thing they have a think about is water. And they decide that they are going to go with a water meter as well, for the same reason of just trying to keep track of their water usage. It does help you to work out if you've got a leak at all. If your meter is showing that, so there's usage going on and you think you've got everything turned off, maybe you've got a leaky pipe or a tap that just needs tightening up. So that's how Llaneco decide to keep a bit of an eye on their water usage. Again, it might be something which a little sign up by the kitchen tap is useful just to remind people to turn things off. Or maybe there's a tap that's really awkward to turn off and people struggle to get it properly closed. Perhaps that's something that just needs looking at to make sure that that is going to be better. Light bulbs is another thing to think about. Depends what your fixtures and fittings are like, but going to LED light bulbs is a really good thing. They are so much more energy efficient if you can do that. I was part of a church where they had a big backlog of old style light bulbs they were trying to use up. And I think that the jury might be out really on, is it better to use up older light bulbs rather than just sending them to waste when they haven't been used? Or is it better just to make the switch now for LEDs if you can, because they are so much more energy efficient in the way that they run? But swapping to LEDs when you can is definitely a good thing. And another thing about telecommunications. Now, this isn't obviously a green issue when it comes to your broadband, your internet and your phone, but there are internet and phone providers out there who are more green in how they operate. So perhaps they carbon offset their own activities, perhaps they are supporting projects around the world. So Plan Eco, they decide to have a little look at some other internet and phone providers and decide to go more green with their phone and their internet. Next thing they have a little think about is the toilets. What can be done there? But I was once an administrator for a church where the vicar asked me to look into waterless urinals as a green solution, and I was like, Christopher, that's not really my area of speciality. But we looked into it, and they did decide to go for waterless urinals in the church community centre. I don't know how they worked particularly, but it was something that they decided they wanted to do. But even just as a simple measure, you can put things into the cistern of toilets to reduce how much water is going through the flush. Depends again on your building and what works for you. You do have particular products that you can use for this, such as the Buffalo. Some people just put a brick in the cistern just to reduce how much water needs to go through for the flush. So I think most water companies do have lists of water saving devices and things that can be bought, just simple things that can go in and make a difference to that. Cleaning products is another area. Can you go green with your cleaning products? Is it possible to swap out the more chemical ones for plant-based products? Can you get them in recyclable packaging? Is it possible you could start using ones where you can go and get refills? It's much better for the people who are doing the cleaning if you can go more plant-based, less chemically, but also for the environment as well. But again, it's about how it works for you, what your usual process is. Plan Eco, they decide they're going to go green with this and find themselves some good refillable eco-based products that are in recyclable packaging as well. Next thing they decide to think about is the disposable cups for refreshments after services, and they decide no, they're going to get rid of these styrofoam cups and replace them with good old-fashioned mugs. I understand at the moment, of course, with COVID, a lot of things are different. It might be at the moment that it's just too difficult. Well, it's not even possible to do refreshments at the moment. Then coming back, there could be concerns around how you manage that. So this could be something for the future to make sure you've got it in place. If you're going to use mugs and cups, then someone needs to wash them up. So you need to work out who's going to do that. It might even be, as a thing to think about, can people bring their own mugs to church? We're all a lot more used now to having our own bottles for bottles of water rather than just buying bottles all the time. A lot of people do have travel cups so they can have coffee and tea on the go. Is that something to think about? Supplying tea and coffee, but people bring their own cups and then use their own, is something to explore. Bins is another one. Whether you've got just a kitchen in your church, or perhaps you've got a church office or a space that's used by different people, how easy is it for people to recycle when they are in the building? Have you got it quite clearly set out where regular waste goes, where you put the paper, where you put the plastic, where you put the tins? Is that something that you can just arrange so that it's as easy as possible for users to dispose the waste that they have into the right sort of bin for where you are? Because that's another thing that I'm aware that different councils have different recycling programs and do things in different ways. But Plan Eco, they decide they are going to have different bins in their kitchen to make it easier for users to recycle. They're also going to have a look at TerraCycle, and this is an organisation through which you can become a hub for more difficult to recycle products. So things that won't go into your usual recycling. Biorose is one, print cartridges is another, sometimes specific things like crisp packets. You can become a hub with TerraCycle and collect those for your local community and then send them off, and they will go for specialist recycling, not with all the general stuff. Another thing to think about is car usage and just how you can perhaps encourage people to find alternative ways of coming to church. Could you have a day where you encourage people to walk to a service particularly, or come by bike? Llaneco decide to put cycle racks up for people who might want to cycle to the church or to the building for other activities. As a cyclist, I'd put a small plea in for, cycle racks under cover are really great. And also cycle racks not up a curb undercover are also really great, but it depends on where you are and what the space you have. But have a think about encouraging people to travel to the church in more eco-friendly ways as well. So with all of those things in place, Llaneco URC have gone that little bit more green. They've got themselves an eco award from A Rocha, which they're very pleased about, and it's just better for nature and for people as well. But in some ways, that could just be the start of the journey. Hopefully, those are small steps, small things that the church can do without too many difficulties, without too much of a cost. And then it perhaps whets people's appetite for doing more. What's possible beyond just those small things that can be done with the building? So that's when you start to think bigger. Can you put solar panels on the roof? What about triple glazing on the windows? A wind turbine even somewhere on your premises? External rendering, such as Michael was saying, the ground source heat pump, or another way of heating the building in an environmentally friendly way. Thermal wallpaper, which I hadn't heard of before I started researching for this, and rainwater harvesting. So these are all things which are getting that bit bigger, both in their scope, but also in their cost. And you were going to start needing specialist advice to explore all of these. But what small steps you've already taken will be a really good building up to doing something bigger, for encouraging the church to explore these bigger options, but also when you're starting to look for grant funding for these things, if you need them, then showing that you've already started on this green journey, that there's already enthusiasm to continue in the direction is a really good thing. Now, on a question of going bigger with your projects, please do get in touch if you are thinking of things that are going to need more investment and more money, because we'd love to help you with that. But particularly do get in touch if your building is listed, if your project's going to cost over £10,000, and if you are going for any grant funding, because you're going to need synod concurrence. This is basically your project will need to come to the Finance and Property Board of the synod, just so that can be signed off. And so because most buildings are held in trust, so therefore the Finance and Property Board need to know what's going on, but also so that we can help you with what you want to do and give you that support as well. But do get in touch with me and I'll be able to help you through all of that process. And just a few things on grant applications. I suspect Chris will probably say more about this, but I just thought it might be helpful from my own experience to share that when it comes to writing grant applications, get your blurbs ready before you start. So a couple of sentences on your church, your project, the community that you're in. You can then cut and paste that from application to application. So before you get going, just get those blurbs, any facts and figures that you need together. It's really helpful before you start filling in the application form. Have a little think about your measurable outcomes. What is it that's going to show the difference between where you started and where you finished? And if you can work this out before you embark on the project, that's really good, because you can start to get the things in place that will show the difference. The carbon footprint is one such tool that will show how your carbon has gone down, but make sure you've got photos before you start as well as through the process and afterwards. You're going to measure it through footfall, for example. Will it encourage more community use of a building? Can you get feedback from people before and after, or even during as well? So just think about what you need to collect as you go along. there's a lot of funders out there. There's all sorts of grants that you can apply for, but it is a bit like applying for a job. So being specific about who you apply for is going to be really helpful. So perhaps zone in on funders who are wanting to fund projects in Wales or wherever you are, projects that are particularly by faith-based organisations, or have that environmental aspect to them. So if you could really make sure that you're hitting the criteria, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and energy applying for things then that hopefully will be more successful. And keep going. So like I say, it is like applying for a job. You can have a really good application, but it might just not get the money because there's somebody else who's just pipped you to the post. It just wasn't quite what in their remit. Even then, there can be a lot more applying for a fund than the money they have to give. So I would say that 1 in 3 is doing really well. So keep going, don't get discouraged. And as I say, do get in touch with us in the Synod office if we can help at all, because we'd really like to support you in helping those buildings to go green.
Thank you, first of all, to Michael and Claire for really sharing some inspiration and some practical ideas about what we can do. So I open up to questions. If you have questions to either Michael or Claire, and I'm sure there is 1 or 2 of you who've got some questions, now is your time. So if you just put your hand, I can see everybody on my screen, so you can either put your hand up or you can virtually put your hand up to ask a question. Eileen.
Hi, I just wanted to say to Michael to thank him so much for that, the story of Libanus. Liz and Neil, Liz and I are members of Beulah in Cardiff, and at the moment we're sort of exploring how to insulate our church community building, which is a huge building with a massive footfall, and you know, hopefully put an air source heat pump in at some stage. And it's just great to see a project like that that's been so successful and so well received. And I'm definitely, none of the people who are closely involved with the project were able to come this morning, but we'll definitely send them this recording and hopefully that will encourage them along the way. But thank you, it's great story.
Thanks, Eileen. Mike from Maes Ronan.
Yeah, just to thank Claire for her presentation. Some fantastic ideas there. As we're a Grade 1 listed building, some of those options are a bit restricted. But one thing we have done is, and I'm a bit disappointed she didn't mention it, is about the bank account. We've changed our bank account to a green and environmentally friendly, ethical bank, which I think we should all do. Really, it's my particular hobby horse. Is that so? You can also all think about changing to an ethical bank. That scores your points on the Eco Church as well. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Could you put the bank in the chat? Would you be happy to share who you went with?
It's the one I looked at several, and the one we ended up going with was Triodos Bank.
Oh yeah.
We looked at the co-op, but they wouldn't accept us because we were not we did not have a registered charity number. And we also looked at a couple of other which I can't remember now, but I can put those. I can let you know who they were. One was a Salvation Army bank. I can't remember what the names were now, but I did go through quite a lot with 3 or 4 different types of banks. The only downside is that we do pay bank charges now, but they are minimal, and it's a price worth paying to get rid of fossil fuels investment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Kerry George.
Thanks very much. It's been such an interesting morning, and I feel lots of practical suggestions and things to consider. As Chris will know, we're working with Chris on a project in Canton Uniting Church in Cardiff, and we have plans to kind of redevelop the site and expand our community garden, but are facing massive challenges as to the cost of the development and how we can fund that. And one of the things that I think some of our members of the development group that I chair have found challenging is that at every stage, the green options seem to be more expensive than the kind of easily available, straightforward options. And we know that in terms of sustainability and the longer term, it will be kind of cheaper in terms of the planet. But I wonder whether you had any suggestions about how to achieve that green development that we want, the sustainable development, when there are such massive challenges as far as the cost is concerned. Or is that,
Michael, I think,
like wave a magic wand?
Michael, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, when we were doing Libanus, we faced precisely this problem, but we were very fortunate in that the Brecon Beacons National Park had specific funds to encourage churches or public buildings to go down the green route. And effectively those funds, this is not how they would phrase it, and it's not how I'd necessarily want to be quoted on it. Effectively, they picked up the difference between the conventional and the green option. Their fund was called the Brecon Beacons Sustainable Communities Fund, and it could be that other local authorities have similar funds. But certainly Brecon Beacons were remarkably far-sighted, and that they actually helped on that. That's why we were able to do it.
Thanks, Michael. Claire, Liz. Sorry, Liz.
Excellent presentations, absolutely splendid. Quite a specific question, really, I think probably to Claire, and that's about applying for grants. You know, she's very encouraging in talking about all these grants. Can you advise, Claire, is it usually 100% or is there an element of matched funding? And if there is matched funding that the church itself would have to provide, is there a way of some magic way of calculating contribution in kind from a church? I mean, in an organization, you can count people's time, you can as part of value and pounds against it. Are there any clever ways of working this way that is matched funding, or are they all, the ones you're talking about, generally 100% funding?
So every fund is different, and that's where it gets difficult with applying for grants, because some will go, yes, we'll give you 50%, and some will go, no, we want to fund the whole thing, and somebody else says, we'll only double what you give. So it can be quite an art putting it all together in a bit of a patchwork for who will fund which. And it depends how big your project is, and some people want to do some bits and not others. So that is tricky. So it will depend on what it is you're doing and what the particular funder will do. But that point about match funding and recognizing the contribution of the church is a really important one. And yes, that's definitely something which people often take into consideration. If you can log volunteer hours, that's a really good one, because you're showing how much time people are putting in, and that, you know, and how much it would cost to pay somebody to come and do what your volunteers do. But it's difficult to track that because it requires your volunteers keeping a timesheet, or you know, how do you get your volunteers to log their time? But if you can do that, if you can get people to do that in particular, and then I mean, anything else from expenses or ways that people are giving, but volunteer time is a really big one, I think. Chris, did you want to add in?
Yeah, I'll add a bit if that's all right, Claire.
Yeah.
There are very few funders that will allow you to directly count in-kind value towards a grant application. There are two big ones that will. The National Heritage Lottery Fund will, and also the Community Lottery will let you as well, and they're two of the very biggest funders. It is worth logging everything. It is worth, and so for instance, the National Heritage Lottery has a value basis. So if you were an ordinary volunteer doing bits and pieces, we'll say that the value is £20 an hour. If you're one of the officers, potentially the value is, sorry, let's turn that around. It says £20 a day, I think it is. The value is £150 a day. If you are giving service as a specialist project manager, the value is £350 a day, as a as a rough guide.
That's really helpful.
And it's worth counting them. You'll be surprised how much the value adds up. So if you have a group of 5 who meet monthly for let's say 3 hours, which accounts to half a day, you quickly add up value, and before you know where you are, your value is in the thousands of given. And whilst it might not lever money directly, it does indirectly, because it shows the strength of your commitment to the project. With regard to match funding, that's a difficult one. There are 2 or 3 measures that you can apply, depending on who you go to. But as a broad range, for every £1 that you contribute, you will get back between £3 and £10 from others. Well, that is a fairly broad range, but that's a good guide to work on. But it does depend where you go, on what funders you go to. And as Claire said in her bit about fundraising, who you go to and why you're going there is extremely important. There is no point in doing the scattergun approach. You need to be very specific in who you go to.
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. And we're hearing more from Chris later on. I want to say thank you to Michael. He's not going to be able to stay with us for the rest of the morning. So thank you very much, Michael, for coming back to Wales for an hour. You're always welcome.
Thank you. It's been lovely to be back in Wales for an hour. I miss it very much indeed. Can I add one final thing, and then I will shut up? Or 2 very quick final things. Firstly, when we were looking for the funding for Libanus, we also learnt that some of the funding sources, they may give a little bit of money, but their forms were so complicated. Some of them were on timing out forms that, quite frankly, the amount of money they were going to get from you and the length of time you were going to spend filling in their damn form and get timed out on, but quite frankly, you lost the will to live on that. So I just pass that on for what it's worth, but just check before you spend hours filling in a form that the form was actually going to give you enough money to make it worthwhile filling in the first place. Yeah. The other one, it wouldn't be me if I didn't finish on a dubious point. We had a slight problem at Libanus when we put bricks in the toilet cisterns to reduce the amount of water. You see, the building isn't used every day. It has a filtration system because it's not on the mains drains or anything like that. And the gradient from the building down to the filtration area isn't significant. So therefore, when we reduced the amount of water that was going down in the flush, now how do I put that tactfully? It was inadequate for the job that it had to do. And we had a little bit of a build-up, which was then a problem. So we had actually to remove the bricks because we discovered that actually the amount of water that was going down was actually what the system needed. Now, that's not to say that in a town system and in a building which is more regularly used that would be the case. But I just throw that in before you all end up in the, oh, I mustn't say that. Don't reduce your water too much, because you may find you haven't got enough for it to do the job.
For those who don't know me, I'm Chris Atherton. I happen to be the Trust Company Secretary and the Synod Treasurer. I'm not quite sure how I gained both the roles, but those are what I have. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully we will get... Now, I'm hoping that you can all see that.
Yep.
Okay, so Claire has given you the sort of bottom up approach with what you can do in simple terms and how you might look towards to do bigger things. And I'm going to pick up on how you might look towards to do the bigger things. Claire had a number of slides. I've only got this one, so just, and I'm going to focus in on some of these areas. They don't necessarily have a particular order, but I'm going to focus in on them. I'm going to start with the green circle, the community circle. Okay, because we're all placed within communities that we have been called to serve, and our local community is very important to us. Often our churches are the lifeblood of our local communities. So when we're thinking about projects that we might want to be looking for external funding on, and this is my sort of context for much of this, we need to think about why somebody might want to fund us. So the first thing that we need to think about is, what is our community like? And we need to think about what's currently there, who's currently there, what sort of organizations are there, which is why the word audit is there. And if you look at the requirements for the Mission Development Fund, that has a requirement now for a community audit. So it makes you look at your community, where your community is, and that should lead potentially to the community telling you what it might be short of. In other words, an identification of need, sort of services or activities that it might want. So often in the past, we've done things on the idea of we'll build it and people will come. And people have moved away from funding that sort of idea to wanting to fund things that people are saying that they want. That they can see that there's going to be some outcome to link into Claire's bit where she was talking about having measurable outcomes. So your audit and your identification of need should lead yourself to some basis of what activities people might want to be seeing. And then you might be able to see whether or not your building and your setup was suitable for those sorts of activities. And at the same time, when you're looking at those activities, you need to think about whether those those activities will fit in with the policy framework that a lot of grant funders are operating to. So grant funders do take notice of what the local development plans say for county councils, for instance. All county councils have to have a local development plan. Your area will be within that local development plan. There isn't a single area in Wales that's not covered by a local development plan. And you need to have a look and see what those priorities are, and they might link in with the local development plan. And also you need to think about links to national policies. Obviously at the moment, health and well-being is very important, not just because of COVID. Health and well-being was a very important characteristic before COVID. We have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales. It's a very innovative piece of legislation. It has health and well-being at the centre of it. It also leads into supporting people in developing skills, and making people feel more self-empowered. And all of that is supposed to link to better economic outcomes, as a sort of a quick high-level summary. But all those things are important connections to have if you're looking for outside funding. And then that might lead you to think on about partners. Another thing that outside funders love is partners. You're much more likely to get funding for a project if you're working in partnership with somebody, if you're co-delivering particular activities. And partnership here is defined as an active engagement, not just in letting somebody use your facilities like a letting. This is an active engagement where you are part of the activity delivery. Now that might lead you to have some formal agreement, which is why the second thing is there, which is an SLA, a service level agreement, and that clearly defines what the partner is going to give you in terms of service, and as far as the partner is concerned, it's clearly going to define what you're going to give as an organization. And then I suppose at this point we're at planning stage. They might intercede a little bit. And I think the first thing I need to tell you about planning is, and Claire had mentioned it in her presentation as well, is don't be shy in getting specialist advice. You may think that I don't want to spend money in getting my specialist advice, but the money may be well spent when you get to project stage. And here I'm not just talking about having appropriate architects, mechanical, electrical engineers, quantity surveyors, the sort of people you'd expect to engage in with buildings. I'm talking about potentially looking at us at a fundraising consultant, potentially looking at a VAT specialist, potentially looking at a project manager, because these people save money. So I'll give you an illustration for this. You've already heard in Claire's presentation about the Barry project. I happen to be working on the Barry project. And one of the things the Barry project did was to take specialist VAT advice. You might say, what's the point of taking specialist VAT advice? In this case, an awful lot, because the project was deemed to be mainly community based, which meant that VAT was only payable on 12% of the floor space. For an over £1 million project, that was a significant saving for £5,000 spent in getting VAT advice. So you might think, oh, I don't want to spend the money, but in actual fact, the money does save you it further down the line. I think the other thing to talk about is timescales. We all like to think things will get done very quickly, but we need to be realistic about timescales. If you're looking at a medium-sized project, and by medium size, we'll say 100,000 plus, between 100,000 and $500,000, those sorts of timescales are probably the best part of 3 years to get from start to finish. If we're looking for a bigger project, we're looking at 5 years plus. So if I use the Barry project is 1.3 million. This particular iteration of the Barry project sort of really started in 2016 and is now coming to the end of its build now, 5 years later. Even if we hadn't had COVID, it would have only finished just before Christmas. So fundraising, Claire has talked a little bit about fundraising, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. It is still the case that there is an awful lot of money out there across an awful lot of sources. You just have to go look for it. And that's the difficult part. When you've done your looking, you then have to decide who you might want to go to. So there are some sources to look for funding in the first place. And one of those is an organization called the Directory of Social Change. They produce fundraising handbooks of sources, and they also produce other books to do with volunteer management and all sorts of things. So do go have a look on their website. Synod has some old copies of the directories. I could have said to you that your local library should have them, but I know a lot of the local libraries have stopped buying them. But it is worth having a look in your local library, because you don't really want to have to buy one unless you're on a really big project, because they're all about £100 each. So there are a number of sources for fundraising, and obviously there are local sources for fundraising. Michael mentioned the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority had a local fundraising source that was available to you, and Claire in the chat has mentioned about the landfill tax. You may or may not be eligible for the landfill tax because there are aspects of the landfill tax recipients that each landfill operation supports, and very few of them support churches. So you'd have to look in your local area, see what landfill facilities they were and what aspects of the landfill tax they support. But the other local source that you have, and generally it's available across the whole of Wales, is the Welsh Church Acts. Some local authorities have got together and manage them on behalf of each other, so one or two might get together. Some local authorities have sought to broaden the Welsh Church Acts monies to not just being able to be spent in churches. They don't give you huge sums of money. Potentially, the sort of average grant is about £5,000, but there's not too many hoops to jump through, to take Michael's point about lots and lots of paperwork for not much money. Then there are obviously national funders. I've talked about two of them. There's the National Heritage Lottery Fund, there's the Community Lottery. They're open to you if you're in a URC building to apply for. They're also open to you if you're in a Methodist building to apply for. Those sources are not open to you if you're in a PCW building or you're in a PCW LEP, because the PCW will not accept lottery funding and will not allow any of its organization to accept lottery funding. And then the other major funder that's still available at the moment is the Welsh Government's Community Facilities Programme. They have a significant amount of funding still, potentially, which will support capital projects. And they're quite keen to support the development of community facilities. And then I think the other one that's worth looking at is the National Churches Trust, mainly because they have specific funding streams for the provision of things like toilets and kitchens, which many of you might be interested in. And then there's, of course, there's all these trust funds. Now, there might be local trust funds, so it's worth doing a Google search for your area. There are local organizations that might offer you funding, Rotary and those sorts of things. They might offer you funding before you start looking through the national directories that we've talked about. I think two things that are very much linked to this are people. Who are you seeking to help, and why? And that might come out of your community identification of need. It might come out of your activities, but as part of your measurable outcomes, you'll need to be thinking about who are the groups that you're going to reach that you're not reaching now. People aren't going to give you money to only do what you're doing now. They're looking for a benefit for giving their money. So they want to see better connection with the groups that you're already connecting with and connection with new groups. Current favorites at the moment are engagement with young people, particularly engagement with groups that support asylum seeker, housing justice, other groups that provide facilities for ethnic minorities, and groups that support women in the broadest sense. So those are the three sort of big ticks that people are looking to fund. And when you think about the agenda socially, nationally and internationally, that those sort of agendas points shouldn't surprise you. You know, funders follow what the trends are. They're like everybody else. And I think the other thing about the last thing I want to sort of touch on is personnel, yourselves. Who is supporting these projects? What's the sustainability of these projects? And in a sense, I'm saying for you to have a successful project, you have to be committed to it. There has to be a sign up from everyone. It can't just be the want or the whim of a small group who drive it forward. It sets itself up, and then within 6 months it all collapses because there's actually nobody to run it. There's nobody to keep it going. So thinking about who's going to manage it, who's going to contribute to it, and how that contribution is going to be managed into the future, i.e. the sustainability of that contribution, is all really, really important. So succession planning for these sorts of things is an important thing. There are obviously legal procedures that you have to follow. Some of those are quite complicated, which is why sometimes you need specialist advice. Planning is a lovely one that's quite complicated. It's extremely complicated for listed buildings. Mike's indicated in my surrounding that some things they might like to do, they can't do because they're grade 1 star. You know, they are the creme de la creme of listed buildings. And we're very fortunate to have one, but that does limit what they can do. So some of the things that Claire indicated that might be nice to explore, you'll find that you can't do them because the listed building regulations won't let you. And one of the key ones that often are hard to do is to deal with lighting, because unless you can adapt your current lighting fittings, you may find that you're told that you have to keep them. The other thing to talk about is solar panels. There is a presumption in planning that permission will be given for solar panels. For churches, that often is not automatic. You'll definitely won't be given it for listed buildings unless the roof that you want to put solar panels on is out of view. And if your building is a significant building, i.e. it makes a significant contribution to the skyline of a particular area, again, it's highly unlikely you'll be given permission for solar panels. And if you want to look at a building that situation pertains to, if you Google Tabernacle Pembroke, which is a URC building, and you look at where they are, they're very prominent in the skyline. You know, they are the big building. They weren't given permission for solar panels because of that reason. Claire has touched on the need to come and talk to us if you're doing things. We're quite happy to come and help you. If you're dealing with partners, we're quite happy to help you with service level agreements, and you'll need trust support if you're dealing with leases or license to occupy, because they're in the name of the trust, not in the name of the local church, because the trust is the building that's holding the buildings on your behalf.
So thanks, Chris, for that. I've got a question. that I'd quite like to ask. So I'm going to start off my question. So in the Pitawba area, the council have used quite a lot of waste ground to put solar panels on. So if you weren't given permission to put solar panels on your building, and you had ground, would you be able to put solar panels in the ground?
The short answer to that is perhaps. It would all depend on an assessment of visual impact. And it becomes so if your grounds were prominent, i.e. they were prominent in the landscape because you were high up, you're unlikely to be given permission.
Thank you. I just thought that might be something that other people might be thinking about. Has anybody else got questions to Chris or even to Claire? If you've got something that popped up over the break, I'm sure Claire will be willing to answer and share her wisdom. Mike.
You're muted, Mike.
Good, Mike.
There's always one, isn't there? There's always one. We've just had our quinquennial report, and it details a list of maintenance that we have to do. I've already talked to Claire about this, but I thought it might be a benefit to others. Are there grants available for maintenance work rather than new projects?
Depends where you look. Potentially the National Churches Trust might give you money for that, and there are other funders that will fund maintenance work. They are few and far between, but they are there. The majority of funders want to see a tangible benefit for their funding, resulting in the engagement of more people rather than just an improvement in a asset.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions? I can see anybody. Put your hand up or put it up virtually if you have. Jason has.
Just quickly to say, it's not a question. I did in my previous life use applying to the National Church Fund, and it was very straightforward. They were very helpful. If you phoned them, they were helpful in filling out in the form, in what we needed to do. And I was thinking, Chris said it's not major money, £5,000. That's major money to me. I know what you mean. It's relatively to other things, but thinking of the smaller things that you might be able to do, that Claire was talking about, it's well worth applying to that fund. It was very, very straightforward and forthcoming.
Thanks, Jason. Eileen.
I was just wondering what both you and Chris and Claire both thought about the idea that the temptation is always to try and get things done, you know, as fast as possible. We're all eager to sort of green our buildings and so on. But what do you think about the idea that, in a way, there is an advantage to hold off a little bit and to see about emerging technologies and also government, you know, government policies? I'm thinking particularly in terms of maybe changing to an air source heat pump when in fact maybe hydrogen will come in, and you know there's a lot sort of changing at the moment. Is there any value in just actually biding your time and just waiting to see what emerges?
I think if I take the starting point from Claire's presentation without trying to pinch what she might want to say, I think starting with some little things helps build momentum. And you know, a lot of our churches are going to be starting from a relatively low level with an idea of greening their operations and thinking in a green way. So I think it is important that the little steps that Claire talked about that you know all our churches consider and look at. You know, it's not by accident that the Synod has a priority to seek its churches to achieve Eco Church awards. not because we want people on an awards accelerator, but we want people to be thinking about these very important things and to be making decisions that help us and the planet moving forward. Technology might change, but then that's always been the case. I think if you're looking at decisions, most of our churches aren't going to have the option of a ground source heat pump because they don't have the available space to have one. It's going to be air source that they're going to be thinking of, or solar panels. Now, solar panel technology has changed significantly and still will do, but you're still saving money when you actually install it, and you're doing something that is green at the same time. So I think I'd be encouraging people to do what they could do, because by doing what you could do, you actually influence other people to change positions. You know, one of the things that is going to make a significant difference, and this isn't a red herring, you know, we need charging spaces for electric cars. You know, we need an infrastructure for that. You know, some of our churches that have car parks and that sort of thing may be well placed to contribute to that infrastructure development. So, for instance, again, I'll mention Barry because it's relevant. They will have charging points in their car park because it's part of their project. Claire.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point about taking those small steps when you can, and I suppose going at the right speed for you and your church, isn't it? To make sure people aren't feeling like they're just being swept along with something, but also you're going along so you can feel like you're getting somewhere. And I was just thinking one thing about if you just go at a steady pace is that the more other people are doing this, the more you can build on their experience and their example. So as you are trying to talk to people about going green and things, like it was fantastic to have Michael's presentation and go, oh, right, okay, Luminous, look what they did and look what Barry are doing. And I mean, I love a field trip. I love to go and see things. So the more examples there are of churches that are doing stuff, you know, could you get a little trip together, obviously COVID secure and all the rest of it, to go and see these things in practice. And that will help people to understand what it is you're talking about and understand why it costs this much compared to the cheap non-eco version and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think you don't have to rush. It's just kind of moving along at a pace that works for you. And but as we go forward, there will be more of these opportunities cropping up. Technologies will be more of them. They will be cheaper. So we're definitely kind of, you know, we're surfing a wave. So that's a good thing.
Thanks, Claire. That's really helpful. If any of you have any other questions to give to Chris or Claire, we've run out of time, but I would suggest that you email them to them. So that would be chris.atherton, is it chris.atherton at URC, or you treasurer?
No, it's chris.atherton.urcwales.
Yeah, chris.atherton.urcwales@urc.org.uk or claire.boot@urcwales@urc.org.uk. You'd think I know the email addresses by now because we've all got the same kind of one.
Can I just make one point very quickly, Judy, which is very important because it's come up twice, and that's drainage. If you are in an old building, please do not put bricks in your toilets, because in actual fact, you will block the drains. The drainage system does not take less than the right amount of water going down it to work. We know that from bitter experience, and it cost one church £9,000 to put it right.
Thanks, Chris. I think that was implied in what Michael was suggesting as well in their experience of Luminous. Thanks for that. So any questions to Chris or Claire, and I'm going to hand over to Jason. Thank you.
Possessions. Look around you, where you are now sat. Look at all the things that are yours. Things you have bought, things that have been gifted, things that are yours in your home. Go beyond now. Think of your chapel, your church, your hymn books, your seat, your minister, if you have one, your church hall and vestry, your church kitchen. A bit further now, your community, your neighbours, your street and village or town and city, your place where you are from. Wow, what about your country, your Wales, with mountains and llynns, with green valleys and sandy beaches, your country, your rugby team, your football team, your language. Perhaps you're an incomer and your country is somewhere else, but it's still your country where you feel you belong. As you sit in your chair just where you are and think about all your things, let Leviticus 25 come to mind, the year of Jubilee. It speaks of possessions, things that we call ours, things that we owe to others, things that others owe to us. And in the midst of all this, in verse 23, God says to the people, Jubilee happens. That is, the trumpet blasts an alarm to remind you that nothing is yours. Nothing is yours. You can't permanently buy and sell things because they're not permanently yours. It all belongs to me, says the Lord. It isn't yours. It can't be. It can't be yours, for you are only journeying for a while in this place you call your chair, your home, your street, village or town, your church, your country. Temporary inhabitants we are, like those who came before us and those who will come after. Therefore, for your time here, you are God's stewards, using what you hold dear for the glory of God, before passing it on to those who come after, and indeed are already here. So when you look and see what is yours, think not of it possessively, but think of it as grace given and grace to be shared.